Hello and welcome. I'm Al Barrows, and this is UFO Disclosure, the podcast that's meant to show an average person's reaction to all the UAP, UFO news from everywhere and anywhere. Today, I'd like to relate and comment on a story that I found on Weird World. It took place between the Army Air Force Base of Fort Dix and McGuire Air Force Base. In 1978, it was one of the few and rare cases of a military person having direct contact with extraterrestrial life. So it was January the 18th of 1978, between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. It was cold at McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey, and the Air Force Security Police Sergeant Jeffrey Morse was conducting his routine patrol of the base perimeter. With years of family tradition in police service, Morse took his duties seriously and diligently monitored the quiet installation while most personnel slept. The silence of his shift was suddenly interrupted when reports began coming in over his radio of unusual aerial objects being spotted over the neighboring Fort Dix Army base. The objects were moving in tight formation, displaying bluish-green lights that cut through the darkness. What seemed at first to be an isolated sighting quickly escalated when radar operators at both installations confirmed the presence of these unidentified objects. They had visual confirmation from multiple points on the base. Morse would later recall. The objects moved with precision, like nothing he'd ever seen before. So as Morse continued his patrol, he noticed increased activity. New Jersey State Police vehicles and Fort Dix military police were running code emergency lights and sirens activated in the direction of Brownsville, New Jersey. The unusual coordination between civilian and military law enforcement at this hour suggested something significant. At approximately 3:30 a.m., Morse received orders to proceed to Gate 5, located at the rear of McGuire Air Force Base. A New Jersey state trooper had arrived requesting emergency access to the base, specifically to the runway area that connected with a heavily wooded section of the Fort Dix training grounds. Upon meeting the trooper, Morse learned the astonishing details of what had transpired minutes earlier. The trooper explained that a Fort Dix military policeman had been pursuing low-flying objects that had hovered directly over his patrol car. The military police officer described the craft as oval-shaped, with no distinguishable features, emitting an eerie bluish-green glow. During the encounter, the officer's radio transmission had suddenly cut off. What happened next would change everything. According to the trooper, a being had appeared in front of the military policeman's vehicle. A creature approximately 4 feet tall, with grayish-brown skin, a disproportionately large head, long arms, and a slender body. The military police officer confronted this unearthly figure. The MP panicked, Morse later reported, recounting what the state trooper had told him. He fired 5 rounds from his .45 caliber into the ET and 1 round into the UAP. Immediately after the shooting, the hovering craft descended at remarkable speed, joining what appeared to be 11 other similar objects high in the night sky. The being, wounded but mobile, fled into the wooded area towards the fence line, separating Fort Dix from McGuire Air Force Base. With orders to assist in locating the wounded entity, Morse permitted the state trooper to enter the base. By this time, multiple security patrols had converged on the area. The search didn't take long. Near one of McGuire's abandoned runways, Runway 5, they found the ET. The extraterrestrial had apparently scaled the fence between the bases before succumbing to his injuries. Morse and the other security personnel observed the body from a distance of 40 to 70 feet. illuminated by the headlights of their patrol vehicles, though not close enough to discern facial features or detailed anatomy of its hands and feet. Morse could see that the entity was unlike any creature he had ever laid eyes on. It was about 4 feet tall. Morse described it had a fat head, long arms, and a slender body. The skin was hairless, wet-looking, and shiny, almost snake-like in appearance. It was grayish-brown in color. Particularly notable was a strong, pungent odor emanating from the vicinity of the body. And I've heard this before, that around ETs, there sometimes is a sulfuric smell. There was a bad stench then from the body, and Morse recalled it was like ammonia, but it wasn't constant in the air. When later questioned about whether the body might have been that of a wild animal or an escaped research specimen, Morse was definitive. No zoo nearby, he said. He said that they didn't have a problem with deer on the runway, but no one ever made such a big fuss over a deer anyway. Following standard protocol for what appeared to be a crime scene, Morse and his colleagues cordoned off the area with rope. However, what happened next deviated dramatically from standard operating procedure. Within minutes of securing the perimeter around the body, a team of unfamiliar personnel descended on the scene. Dressed in fatigues, without patches or insignia, and wearing blue berets, they quickly took over the situation. And I'm sure that I'm not the only one that's heard of a special assigned unit that comes in and takes care of craft and ET bodies. This is reminiscent of many other reports that we've all heard. This team quickly took control of the situation. So all the personnel, including Morse himself and other regular security police, were ordered to stay outside the established perimeter. They took over. Morse said that when asked who they were told nothing and ordered to stay outside the ropes. Morse did note that all of the mysterious team members were staff sergeants or higher in rank, yet they wore no identifying marks on their uniforms. Their blue berets were identified to those worn by McGuire security police, suggesting they may have been a specialized unit stationed on base, which would explain their rapid response. Under the glow of portable generators brought in to illuminate the scene, Morse observed the team spray the body with an unknown substance from a portable tank. They then covered the entity with a white sheet. Before daybreak, the team carefully placed the body onto a platform and constructed a wooden frame around it. This was subsequently placed into a large square silver metal container, approximately 10 by 10 feet, with unidentifiable blue markings. Access to the immediate area was severely restricted. Morse noted that only the base commander, a security squadron commander, and a first lieutenant, and the security police squadron, and a base photographer were permitted inside the cordon area. As dawn approached, a C-141 cargo aircraft arrived from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And I've heard that before, and I'm sure most of you have as well, that most ET bodies wind up at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Using a forklift, the containment box holding the ET was loaded onto the aircraft. Morse, still on duty, watched from a distance as the plane took off at approximately 7 a.m., carrying the ET cargo to what he presumed was Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Long rumored, as we all know, in UFO circles, a repository for extraterrestrial materials and bodies. For Morse and the others involved, The incident at McGuire was far from over. The machinery of secrecy was already in motion. 2 days after the incident, Morse received 2 orders to report to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He was not alone. 3 other personnel who had been present during the discovery of the body were also summoned. They were transported together on another C-141 aircraft. Upon arrival at Wright-Patterson, Morse and his colleagues were separated for individual interrogations. The setting was austere and intimidating, resembling a court-martial proceeding more than a debriefing. Morse found himself seated in a sparse room with a table and chairs facing multiple interrogators. Morse was interrogated by several men. He remembered one who was apparently a civilian. He had a pipe and beard. The questioning focused exclusively on what Morse had witnessed and what information he possessed about the incident. At no point did any of the interrogators provide explanations or directly reference the nature of what had been retrieved from the McGuire Air Force Base. All they wanted to know was the nature of the incident, what Morse knew, and then they told Morse to keep his mouth shut. Morse stated, quote, "I signed the form and it is supposed to bind me for life." Okay, so a non-disclosure agreement, I'm assuming, but I've never heard one that was binding for life. Anyway, the day after the interrogation, Morse returned to McGuire Air Force Base, where he was debriefed by his commanding officer and released for normal duty. As if by unspoken agreement, the incident was never again to be discussed by anyone at the base, as though it had never even happened. Shortly thereafter, each of the airmen that had been involved in the incident received transfer orders to separate overseas bases. Morse was reassigned to Okinawa, Japan, effectively scattering the witnesses across the globe. For 2 years, Sergeant Morse maintained his silence about the events at Fort Dix and McGuire Air Force Base. However, in September of 1980, while still stationed overseas, he made the decision to document what he had witnessed. Using official military letterhead, he wrote to UFO researcher Leonard Stringfield, providing a detailed account of the incident. Morse's decision to break his silence was not without consequence. In subsequent communications with Stringfield and fellow researcher Richard Hall, he reported incidents of surveillance and harassment. His mail was often intercepted, phone calls monitored, and on multiple occasions, government vehicles were observed near his residence. Despite these pressures, Morse persisted in sharing his story, even providing a copy of an incident complaint report, Form 1569, related to events of January the 18th, 1978. This document, though marked unfounded, which Morse explained referred only to the limited information available to the security police squadron, contained names of personnel involved, and corroborated elements of his account. In the years that followed, Morse's credibility was repeatedly assessed by researchers who met with him face to face. Richard Hall, who interviewed Morse in January of 1985, found him to be amiable, articulate, and consistent. Hall noted that Morse did not exhibit behaviors typical of someone fabricating a story. He showed no obsession with the incident, had limited knowledge of UFO literature, and expressed a willingness to be investigated. Most telling was Morse's lack of embellishment. When asked about details he couldn't recall or hadn't observed directly, he simply acknowledged the limits of his knowledge rather than filling in gaps with speculation. While Morse's testimony stood as the primary account of the Fort Dix incident, a second witness eventually emerged to provide partial corroboration. George Filer, a former Air Force major who had served as an intelligence officer at McGuire Air Force Base, In the very year of the incident in 1978, he came forward with his own recollections. George Filer's background as an intelligence officer lends credibility to his statements. As an intelligence officer whose duties included briefing the commanding general, he would have been positioned to learn about significant incidents on the base. The Fort Dix case raises disturbing questions about government transparency, the existence of specialized units dedicated to containing evidence of extraterrestrial life. So, what Sergeant Jeffrey Morse saw that night in 1978, could that be something that the government is presently hiding from us? Is that way too classified to have leak out? To me, Jeffrey Morse's report sounds very credible. His story never changed after decades. He maintained the story never wavered in his account. His story stayed unchanged over decades of scrutiny. There was also George Filer, the second witness, who was an Air Force pilot that corroborated his report. Either way, it stands out as being very unique because it's an incident where there was actual direct contact between a military personnel, a human being, and a non-human entity that unfortunately ended in the death of that non-human intelligence. My name is Al Barrows. This has been UFO Disclosure. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.